Okay, where do we start? I don't know if anyone else is going to join. There are a few more people. Sam is going to be a bit late, but she'll join us at some point. And yeah.
This is a great group. My goodness, I'm very
Isn't it?
honored to be part of it with all of you.
Where do you want to go first? Shall we start with the slides and get them out of the way quickly?
Prepared something, let's look at it.
Yes, yes. Okay. It's very similar to last time. And I'll share now so you can see. Is Neptune moving on your screens or is it static? I wonder. Can you see it now?
Static.
Okay, that was supposed to be a moving, rotating Neptune, but obviously when I share with you, it stops moving. So anyway.
I think you're dressed like the moving Neptune, so you're doing the work.
Okay. Well, let's start here. Again, like last time, with a few keywords. This time for Neptune. I don't know, I'm a bit confused with Neptune all the time. So reading through the list, what stands out for you? Where do we get it from?
Where do we get it from?
When you say Neptune, what's the first word or key phrase that comes to your mind? Maybe it's not on the list.
The ocean of consciousness. I think of Neptune with the at the ocean and the large consciousness that is endless looking.
Yes. So not only endless, but all-inclusive, isn't it? The idea here with, I mean, as a difference to every other energy, is that we're trying to get everything involved at the same time, even if it's very different. And it's not like with Saturn, where we want to include things in a group and deal with them together, but there are always limitations. They need to all answer to certain rules or certain criteria and stuff like that. Here, whatever it is, when we go deeper, we realize with Neptune that it's all connected, that it's all one, or at least that's how it's supposed to be. And it's one of the challenges. I guess nowadays when we study astrology with this more psychological perspective and together with depth psychology, we always led through this concept of the collective unconscious when we speak about Neptune, isn't it? We have the personal unconscious, but this is the collective one, the vast one, as you said, Lauren, you know, this all-inclusive, endless field where everything is there and has been there for since the beginning of time, and how we can connect subconsciously with knowledge which is not directly experienced but comes from somewhere nobody knows where. I don't know if it's genetic or if it's spiritual or if it's racial or what it is all about, but we do have these common messages, do we, that we feel instinctively connected to, regardless of where we come from and what's our background and age and all the other factors that are limiting, like Saturn, for example. What do you think?
The way we connect is through feelings.
Yes. Yes. Not like with Uranus, isn't it? Where it was more about the mind, the concepts, what we think of. Here it's the feelings. Yeah, you're right. So, and we also urge to transform our feelings through Neptune. Maybe that's where all this suffering that we usually connect with it comes from. That it's there to trigger you to transform how you feel about maybe something particular, because I guess it's very related to where Neptune is in the chart, where in what house mostly we have it. So that's where we need to deal with something hard, something of a lack, of a deprivation or longing for something that is not there, whichever it may be, along the lines of the house where we have Neptune natally. And then through going through this impossible to solve problem, maybe we are changing our way, our attitude and feelings about the situation, and that's how the situation is transformed later. Do you believe in that?
Can you repeat?
You know, I was kind of referring back to this talk that we did. Remember when we spoke about Neptune in Pisces several months ago? We had this topic then. And when we were doing that, I started with a long introduction there about Neptune itself and how it could be a trickster, you know, through those feelings of loneliness, deprivation, suffering, lack of something, everything that we want to go back and connect to a bigger whole that we feel like we've been separated from, with everyone in a different extent. But how this can be overcome eventually if we change our attitude towards the source of the suffering. So it's very easy to perceive that that's coming from outside, that something is an oppressor to us, that something is taking away what we need. But that's how it seems most of the time. It's very confusing, but it's probably the task of realizing that something inside you, not like a blame, it's not like about blaming ourselves, but it's about maybe understanding our own charts, understanding our own psychological way of exchanging energy with the world and with other people, and how this can be triggering certain things or attracting certain things to us, and whether we can maybe transform those things in a way by changing how we feel about it, so changing the feeling about it. Is that possible at all? Do you think so?
Well, I think, I think that's exactly when I associate Neptune with the philosophy of not doing in Taoism. We don't transform. We don't do anything.
Mm-hmm. But maybe that's not a direct action of now sitting down and thinking, I'm going to do this or that. I'm going to kind of fight with it, which is very Martian. It's more like, yeah, there is a lot of letting go involved, isn't it? So with Neptune, it's all about letting go of preconceived delusions and frames of reference. So a little bit like, again, going back from Saturn to beyond. Last week we spoke how we can do this through Uranus. Mm-hmm. Now it's another exercise, but this time we are again going from Saturn beyond, but to Neptune. And right. Maybe that's what you're talking about in letting go.
I see it as, you know, benefiting through release, where Jupiter is more about benefiting through expansion. Mm-hmm. Neptune is more about being ultimately for your good from the things that it takes from you.
So are you saying, Robin, that Neptune always wants to take away something that we don't need in the first place?
Not necessarily just don't need, but, you know, a way that we function in the world is with the belief of control or the illusion of control. Mm-hmm. And Neptune wants to show you that there is a functioning and a way that the world functions beyond your control. And so you become that much more, I guess, in sync with your environment or with spirit once you're forced into this experience it's going to take you through where you're no longer in control.
Mm-hmm. Almost like teaching you that you cannot put everything right only through your will, but you need to trust in a higher force of some kind and have faith in that force, that it's kind of knowing what it's doing even if we don't understand it in the moment.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, my idea here was
related to, oh, excuse me.
No, go ahead.
I've never related to these negative things you've got here with Neptune of self-destructiveness. I've never, I don't get that. I mean, I get that Neptune is all those things like spiritual realms, mm-hmm. the collective unconsciousness, the merging, the all-inclusiveness. And if there's a trouble, it's because one does not also interact with Neptune with structure and to combine it with the other elements that we have. Yes.
Well, we are assuming
I've never seen Neptune as in itself self-destructive, but let's say it had something in a chart that was, you know, an aspect to it. I could maybe, or twisted motives. that doesn't seem like those would be Neptune qualities.
Really? I think they're
Yes.
pretty well. All we're talking about here when we see this is excesses of Neptune. So, as you said, those situations when there is nothing else to balance on the other side. Of course, by itself, none of the energies is negative, but we are looking at different faces of it. So, here I included some positive and negative expressions. And we know that when Neptune goes wrong, for one reason or another, when there is too much of it, when we don't know how to work with it, maybe we simply don't work with our chart.
It could be like if you drugged out yourself, then you just want to merge and merge and merge and not be here. Well, that would be at some point that's self-destructive.
Yeah,
Yes.
because you're doing too much.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I think I was born with my Neptune is quincunx, my Mercury, which, as you said, right now I've got the Neptune on it, and my Neptune is conjunct Saturn. So I've experienced more the Neptune helping me in spirituality and the Saturn helping me in finding the containers and the boundaries and the discipline with the spirituality.
You see, that's very important, the way you have it. And that has colored so much your perception of it, because Saturn there, I have Uranus with Saturn, you have Neptune with Saturn. And what I find similar in the two situations is like almost like in certain times you can have the best of both worlds. They're supposed to be extremes, they're supposed to be opposites, but at the same time you can integrate them without going too much on one or the other, almost like they're keeping each other in check when they're together like this. So maybe, I mean, this is just one possibility.
That chart I did last Saturday, where the person had exactly Sun conjunct Neptune, both of them were in Virgo. And so I thought that was a nice balance for her of the service, and that you take your Neptune and your Sun with service.
Yes.
To the world. And anyway, but I'm looking at your keywords there. The other one, twisted motives. Could you talk what that could mean?
Oh, yes, of course. Sometimes with excessive Neptune, we are not even certain about what we intend with an opinion, with an action, everything. Let's not forget that Neptune is a very subconscious energy. Very often we are motivated there by forces that are beyond our control. And these can be of all sorts of different types, positive and negative. So this deception, self-deception kind of, sorry, I switched to the next without even realizing, but we are back here. So, you know, this illusionary, dreamy state that very often Neptune puts us into could be quite deceptive. That's what's the idea here. By the way, I got this from Stephen Arroyo, and he only has he has a little book, like a handbook for interpreting charts for beginners. And there I decided to look at what keywords he gives there for Neptune, and he's only giving like 2 sentences. Couple of phrases for positive and couple of phrases for negative Neptune. And this was one of his negative phrases. And I found it very interesting. Like, I don't see this very much in other places. So thinking about this, you know how if you have Neptune on your descendant right now, like Jason has, for example, you can potentially fall prey to other people's twisted motives. Yeah, they may present a situation in a particular way while it's not truthful. There is a lot about Neptune which is not supposed to be objective. Neptune is a very subjective energy, and we can always argue, well, that's not the truth, but what is truth? And we can start philosophizing about it and so on and so forth. That's also a very Neptunian approach to things. So yeah, I know it sounds a bit dark, this twisted motives expression, but I feel like it could be true even for the person that, for example, I once had to prepare a talk about the moon signs, and in the workshop there was a representative of almost every sign there, and I was trying to make some connection with real life. When we came to Pisces, the Pisces moon, something that came along was that even the people that had this moon, and I have a lot of them in my life as well, people with moon in Pisces, I don't know why, share that sometimes they don't understand where their motives about doing something come from. There is no definition. There is no real conscious connection. But it's kind of later sometimes discovering that what you believed led you to something actually wasn't the thing, that you were motivated by something else. And it's often very difficult to admit it or to find out in the first place what that is. Yeah, so it's a bit deceptive overall.
And how about the word glamour? How do you relate that to Neptune?
That's probably one of the most important keywords for Neptune, as Neptune in the social sense of Neptune. Now, when we're looking at it, not that much as a force in the personal chart, mixing with a planet in the chart and coloring that. And by the way, when a planet is mixed with Neptune, usually that planet is unfocused. It's blurred. Its effect is not directional. But anyway, when we move away from this and we look at the social implications of Neptune, those Neptunian generations that we all belong to, and the trends of the times, the things that entice us and make us dream and make us believe in different things that seem a lot more interesting and glamorous to us than to other generations. This is to do with that in the atmosphere, there is always something of a common trend, of a almost like the common air that we all breathe, emotionally speaking, in this point of time, that stirs us in one direction or the other. So these are the fashions of the times. You know how Neptune governs the fashion in everything, especially in the arts and in music and in the creative field, but also in things like politics, social sciences, and everything. So glamorous is one of the things that we really need to be careful when we consider also where our Neptune is. For example, your Neptune by sign may be making you a bit more vulnerable to the whatever illusions of success or getting something along the lines of that sign you may find in life. So a reason to look twice and think twice about the sign of your Neptune. So I have Neptune in Capricorn, for example. Intrinsically, I need to be aware that maybe what I perceive out there as authority, as structure, as government, whatever in this along these lines, may not be what it seems like. And that my whole generation is probably subject to certain illusions. Say the Capricornian illusion. What is that? Maybe that you can be successful in the corporate world in a way that already we can see falling apart. We can see how the last generation, my generation, was so glamorized about, making a lot of money, going into the big universities, then getting, into those jobs and maybe even starting businesses. There is a certain trend around this, which is a certain illusion of the generation. And then as this generation goes forward and the next Neptunian trend comes, this is kind of fading away and we can see what really stood behind it. So yeah, but everything that is a kind of propaganda in one way or another is a Neptunian thing.
Clint Eastwood has Neptune on the MC.
Yes. You remember when we were speaking about prominent people? How was it when people that have planets culminating? So on the MC. And
yeah,
how
we had Uranus on the MC, Neptune on the MC, things like that.
Yes, Neptune on the ascendant and on the MC makes one of the most interesting for the public personalities. Ones that can become role models, that can become celebrities, people of interest, they don't necessarily need to be the best in what they do or really, there doesn't need to be substance underneath, but the glamour is there, definitely, or at least the potential for it. Because maybe if you have it on the MC, there is no guarantee you would be famous or anything of that sort, but at least you would be somehow provoking, opening up the emotions in society, which happen to be universal. So people see you as an exemplar of something that almost everybody can identify with. And probably that's the reason why certain people become famous, become so popular, because they play the tune of so many others out there, and they present something that, as an archetype, as a symbol, even without knowing it, that others really need to see and to feel.
Neptune may be a place where you're used for things beyond your vision. So you play in a role that you don't necessarily see that you're playing, for better or for worse.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Robin, this thing about the role playing is very typical for Neptune in the first house, I think. Yeah, the chameleon quality of getting into a role and playing it really well. But when you get out of the role, it's almost like a different personality altogether. So lots of actors and lots of people who, have shared that observation that they can do that. They can get in and out of a role. Have had Neptune in the first house or around the ascendant, maybe on the 12th house side, but still very close.
What would you say about seeking redemption? That also is not something that comes to mind when I think of Neptune normally.
The biggest case about this whole concept of Neptune and redemption makes Liz Green in her thick book called Neptune. I don't know if you have that one. So she's
No.
calling the book Neptune, the quest for redemption. I think that's the title, something like that. And she explains it in so many different detailed examples and things, looking at mythology and then in culture and history and so on and so forth. But ultimately, it's all about, this oceanic feeling of Neptune that we all feel, of belonging to something greater than the personal ego, which is then connecting us to the sense of community, wanting to be in community. But this is the sea idea, that maybe we all come from the sea and we are going back to the sea. So obviously, we are trying to, in the process of growing up in a Saturnian fashion, we are stepping away more and more and more from the source, which is the sea from which we came from. And we are looking for ways to go back there when it's hard, when it's difficult, when we can't deal with Saturn. And this is the longing to kind of go back to the womb of the mother in a way. And suffering is then connected to, looking for someone to take care of us like we were taken care of in childhood when we were still not independent. And being redeemed, being given like a chance to solve whatever is our suffering. So there are many other directions of this, but this is just one example of this
When I
common
think of
longing.
redemption, I think that you've done something wrong and you need to be redeemed.
Yes.
You know, and
Yeah.
that's more how I think about seeking redemption would be
Mhm.
like like someone is put in jail and because they stole something, and then they seek redemption for their wrongdoing. So that's what I don't get.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
because
usually,
Mircea Eliade, the historian of religion, he says that in all cultures there is a myth of the fall. So for Jews and Christians who have been kicked out of paradise,
Mhm.
and there is an original sin. And he says in all cultures with in various forms, but there is a myth of an original state which is perfect, which is paradise, and there is a fall. That means we have been downgraded, and then we want to go back to this paradise. So there is this notion of fault, of original sin, or things like that, which is part of our big archetypes. And we want to redemption. That means we want to go back to this original state of purity and go to paradise.
And
Mhm.
how is that Neptunian? Is that you're wanting to go back to the collective spiritual whole?
Yes, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very religious as a concept, isn't it? And the age of Pisces was the most religious age so far. That's connected to looking back at, as you said, Jean-Marc, that we've done something wrong and we need to uh, pay for it in a way. But I think where I was leading you was, and Liz Green is talking about the other kind of redemption, even though this one is also valid, but like the other one where you feel like you've been wronged and you search for redemption in that way, like you search for the wrong to be corrected so you can
How is
feel
that
good again.
Neptunian? I understand the concept. I just don't see how it's Neptunian.
Ah,
Really?
how can you not?
I don't know. My brain, I guess, didn't go there. I've got I've got Neptune on my Mercury.
Neptune is
as my
clouding
first
your
house.
Mercury, Lauren.
I've always thought of Neptune as either delusional or spiritual, that kind of collective ability to be part of the whole. And I haven't thought of it as wrongdoing seeking redemption, or that, as much, or the glamour. I haven't, I guess fantasy and deception, that kind of makes sense with Neptune. I'm just trying to take it as, I get all these concepts. It's just, okay, how is it Neptunian?
Okay, well, let's do the first one first, which is the glamour one. You know how it comes from the same sources that you already mentioned, the fantasy, the imagination, what triggers our imagination, what triggers our dreaming. And when we see that Neptune is a social planet, a social force, which is beyond the everyday, ego reality, then we see how we can be affected from things outside, the trends in society, in culture, and so on, so that they trigger those dreams. So we start dreaming as a collective in a certain direction, all in one in one goal, due to the Neptunian, say, trend of the time. And the other thing about the redemption is also about the idea of victimhood, which very often is a key thing with Neptune. How you are most of the time lacking something with Neptune. So your Neptune is showing you what you're deprived of. And it feels like it's very easy to feel like a victim with Neptune, especially if you don't have enough Saturn, as maybe that's why you don't understand it, as you do have enough Saturn.
And they're like on top of each other, my natal net, and they're part of so many formations, the finger of God and all that.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I don't relate to it, but I want to learn about it.
Well, you see, I can refer you back to my talk. I think you were there, but maybe it's worth re-listening, where we went in a lot more detail about this, all of this. And here, today, the idea was to look at the cycle of Neptune, more than what Neptune represents in general. This is just a quick reminder about what Neptune represents. As always, it turns out to be the most elusive one, because you see what happens. Everybody's understanding it in a different way. It's escaping definition. There are contradictions here and there, or at least perceived contradictions. So it's very interesting what Neptune does when we start talking about it. It's not like when we spoke about Saturn, we all agreed, yeah, that's Saturn, and this is Saturn, and the other thing is Saturn. It was very obvious. But I must admit, I had to read so many different books to start having like a more comprehensive view of Neptune, and not necessarily connected only with a couple of things as I used to in the beginning. So Liz Green is presenting it in one way. Then Stephen Forrest, in his book of Neptune, which is brilliant, by the way, I really recommend it. The Book of Neptune is called. Completely different. Then you have, what else? Who else wrote on Neptune? Remind me.
Maurice Fernandez.
Yes. Maurice Fernandez's book, it's very different as well. Completely. It's about Neptune, Pisces, and the 12th house together. So it's a very evolutionary astrology, more related one. Jeffrey Wolf Green has a different concept. So everybody's like, when you piece together all those things, you see that there is a common denominator, definitely. But they are different. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other things?
Yeah, like I said, looking at the list, those were the ones that stuck out as,
Good. We had the reason to look at them. Any other thoughts, everyone else?
Can you guys hear me? Am I not?
Yeah, we hear you. Go ahead.
Lauren,
yes.
where is your Neptune?
It's in the 8th house.
Just tell me.
Saturn and Neptune are in the 8th. Oh, you mean the exact degree? It's at 24 degrees Libra, my Neptune, and Saturn is at 26 degrees Libra.
All right, Lauren, pause. So you said the transit Neptune is currently conjunct your natal Mercury, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so in that case, right now, a few days ago actually, whenever Mercury was stationing retrograde at 25 degrees of Libra, he was on top of your Neptune, and he will be again soon. So because you have these two transits that coincide, Mercury and Neptune, those are days for you to have direct experience of what that Neptune transit signifies in a bigger way and how those two work together for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What did you say was transiting the Neptune in Libra?
Mercury. Mercury, here, I'll tell you when.
Oh, you're there, like one is on top of the other one. Oh.
They're on top
Both ways.
Oh, wow, that's a double whammy.
Lauren, if you think about, do you journal or do you have a calendar?
Yes.
So if you think about September 30th, October 1st, both of those days, Mercury was at 24 degrees of Libra, as well as September 22nd, September 23rd. So those
Okay, I'll go back and look at those. Thank you. Thank you.
We'll
That
get
was
there.
correct.
We're getting to the transits next, so we can see how it falls in the charts and so on. So unless you guys have any more comments on the keywords, let's move on.
Sure.
Do you have any more comments on the keywords? Anything else you want to share?
Your graphic did start moving now.
Mhm. My Neptune started moving now on your screen.
Yeah, it
moving.
did. Mhm.
Isn't
When you
it cool?
came back to that page, it started moving.
You could add, well, it is included, but not directly. You could say all mental health problems as associated with Neptune. Not all, but a lot of mental health problems, psychosis and so on, depression.
Yes, yes. Well, you see, maybe that comes from the unconscious element, maybe because it's almost like an antipode to Mercury in a way, as it blurs everything rather than clarifies it. As I said, Neptune unfocuses everything that it touches. So that's like a rule of thumb we can use to make things maybe a little bit more straightforward for us when we're looking at it in the charts. Like I have it square my Mars, and this is making Mars less effective, like making Mars less ambitious or less pushy in a way, sometimes lazy. So whatever it touches in your chart, it is kind of saying almost to this planet, don't be too focused into your function, but it's blurring the function in a way. I don't know if you... Yes.
Is everybody seeing the keywords? Okay, you haven't switched to the other. Okay.
Not yet. Yeah,
Thank you.
I will be just in a sec.
Okay.
Could I share it from Michael Mayer?
Yes.
Because he really goes for the core principles. And there's a great presentation on that in his book, Astrology of Relationship. And he has for Neptune, the keynote is simply this: the dissolution of antiquated forms and structures and the emergence of more inclusive universal values and principles.
Yes. They are all on the same line, Woodier, Mayer, and Ruperti. They're all speaking exactly about this thing, that the main idea with Neptune over the course of life, like integrating Neptune more and more, is traveling from less inclusive to more inclusive realms. But this is very philosophical, and I don't know how you guys, what do you understand by this? But as an opposition to Saturn, which wants to distinguish, exclude, say, like define a separate individuality, how it differs from everybody else. Here we've got what we all have in common and how to include even more and more and more in the common spirit. So I didn't quite like write it this way here because I thought this is a more, I don't know, maybe more of an advanced concept for Neptune, where you need to have done certain things to understand things in general to be able to work on that level. Do you think so, Dwayne? Or we can all apply it in a way?
Well, we've all got our own take on it. You know, I go to, of all the keywords you have here, the ego surrender to me is really at the core.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the three outer planets, the transpersonals, are really about, you know, Roger calls them ambassadors from the galaxy. So there's a three-stage process, essentially. And it's all about transforming our consciousness from egocentricity to a much broader galactic centricity. You know, he's calling for the emergence of a new galactic astrology.
Yes.
And we have to see these three planets as an integral part of that process. The book, The Sun is Also a Star,
Mm-hmm.
he shares the three outer planets as signifying as a process that involves a correlation to the temptations of Christ. So there's three temptations, one associated with each planet. And I don't know if this is the place to go into that, but maybe on another session where we go into more of a galactic orientation, we could really dive into that. I think there's some really important information.
So what was
there.
the one about Neptune?
What is the test?
What is the Neptunian test? Yes.
Well, it's all about glamour and the you know, kind of aura of transcendentalism that comes to one who has opened up to some extent to that realm, to the broader realms. It's how do they use that that empowerment. The whole process, as Rudyard indicates, is to dissolve the ego.
Mm-hmm.
And so if in those three stages, there's this process of grappling with the ego and being released from its limitations. So yeah, as I say, there's a lot to go into there, and
Yes.
that would be a whole session.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
It's funny how these two things constantly counteract, the Saturnian and the Neptunian, ego, anti-ego. As we also know, and that was touched upon in the previous time we spoke about this, how if you don't have enough Saturn ego, then you are blurring the boundaries so much that you no longer can express the spiritual energy of Neptune in a positive way. But that's how glamour becomes very tempting. As you're looking for a personage to embody your vision, your dream, or you're looking for a very easy, glamorous solution of a problem that you're having, and somebody out there is offering that, and you're very willing to just go and accept it. As you have lost the independence of the strong Saturnian ego underneath, which is supposed to be having some sort of autonomy, and then from the perspective of that autonomy, you open up to the higher realms, not the other way around, as most people try to do, to kind of skip Saturn and go straight to Neptune, if you see what I mean. And that's how they crash terribly, as that's the world of illusions and glamour and deception and so on and so forth, which are, you know, the other face of it, in a way. But that book is great, isn't it, Dwayne? I so regret I didn't have it with me this week. I mean, it's in Valencia. So I was going to reread it again because it's the most insightful thing you guys can see about the three trans-Saturnian planets, and a totally different way of thinking about them, not as in most popular books. And it's maybe you've already read it many times and you know what I'm talking about, but if you can have this book, it's really
Are you
something.
talking about the one that Dwayne mentioned of
Yes,
Michael Mayer?
No, it's Rudyard's book quote, the sun is also a star, a
Oh,
galactic
okay.
perspective of astrology, or something like that. Yeah. It's not online. You have to find the book, buy the book itself. It's small, but it's very good, really interesting. And Dwayne, anything
And
else you want to? Yeah.
I just want to say later on when we're storytelling, because Mo, you gave me those dates, I have a magnificent story to tell you
I bet
what
you
happened
do.
on that date. It was a miracle, and it's almost like unbelievable what happened that day.
Why don't you tell us? We're talking about Neptune. You had a direct experience.
Okay, well, I was early. I had finished my meditations in the morning, and I have one perfect picture of my father and my mother and my two daughters. And I made it into a plaque, and it's at a window. So I'm sitting on a chair nearby, and all of a sudden I see a hole in the picture, and huge amount of brilliant light was coming through it. I thought, how could there be a hole in it? It's a plaque. And it turns out, as I was kept staring at it, and this light was as bright as could be coming from this one spot, I go up to it to make sure that it didn't have a hole in it. It didn't. And the spot it was coming from was my father's heart, the exact space of my father's heart. And here was this so much light coming out of his heart to me, or visually seeing it, that I had to go check there wasn't a hole in the picture.
Wow.
So my father passed, so the eighth house, and that communication was very profound to me of the connection with my father that day, who is probably the person I might love the most in my life, was my father.
And was
Wow.
that the day? Sorry.
It was
Communication from God.
September. That was the day that that Emma had said to look at September. It was like September
So,
20.
Is that when Mercury was on the
22nd,
Neptune?
22nd.
That
What?
was when transiting Mercury was on your Neptune?
Yes, it was in the eighth
So,
house.
but it
That's what he
was
said, I think.
obviously it was also on your Saturn.
Yes, it was.
So that may
So
have a
on both
connection.
of
Why?
them, and just to, I mean, really, I've had a few things that are not physical happen to me in my life. I was, it was, and that was amazing. I really, I would swear on a physical level, that a nail or a hole had gone through that picture. That's how
Magic.
much the light was coming from it. And it was impossible to explain physically. It was a metaphysical experience,
Yes.
or whatever you say.
Metaphysics is supposed to be connected with Neptune. Another missing word from the list, as is magic as well.
Yeah.
So,
So
Lauren, from that story, what did you feel? What did it elucidate in Neptune for you?
oh, it made me feel so happy. It made me feel so miraculous. It also reminded me, because my eyes went to the picture and I could see the fabric. Like if you have tile being put together, there's a netting underneath the small tiles. I could kind of see the netting of that hole. And it just gave me this remembrance that I can have telescopic experiences that show me things, and that that there isn't death when it comes to those we're the most connected to, that there's this ability to have a miracle happen of contact from people beyond, as well as breaking up. I'm a lucid dreamer, so I'm used to sometimes going up and seeing a stone on the other side of a valley carefully. But I haven't had that for a long time. That it made me feel so happy and connected to my father as well as to spirit. And it felt like I've got permission for whatever that day was going to bring.
A very special combination of the two being on top of each other, Mercury over Neptune, Neptune over Mercury at the same time. So that's pretty unique.
I feel like I'm so foolish because I pay so much attention in detail when I do work for other people, but for my own chart, I forget to look.
You're not the only one. We all do this, don't we?
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I was just realizing a few days ago that in just a few days' time, probably about a week, my progress moon is about to move to Pisces, which is like once in every 2.5 years change. And Pisces, exactly. So I guess something is about to reveal itself in the Neptunian world soon. Okay, some dates for you, and we can continue. You can continue with your stories. If you think of now, I thought this is the best place on this slide to share stories, because these dates may remind you of certain things or the ages that we mentioned. And basically, last time we spoke about Saturn and Uranus consecutively. It was about the generic cycle and the personal cycle. The generic cycle, that's to do with everyone because they are at a certain age, which is this thing on the on here. Roughly at what age you get the aspects of Neptune to itself in the chart, and they are, as you see, some of them coincide with some of the Saturnian transition points, with some of the Uranian transition points. And I think that's making things a lot more interesting when you start seeing that, for example, at 42 in the midlife crisis, you have so much going on with almost all of the outer planets and Saturn at the same time acting. And then we have the Neptunian generations, which is the other side of the story. This time I decided to do this because Neptune is a 163-year cycle. It's not like everything that we saw so far. We cannot live through it in one lifetime. Most people can experience half of it, so up to about 82, which is the opposition of Neptune. It's not exactly 82, but around that age. So what we can see then is that we have these aspects, the semi-square at about 20, then the sextile just before the Saturn return, 26, 28. It's a very dynamic age because the progress moon also comes back and so many things happen then. And we kind of have this easy creative time with Neptune in this moment, where Neptune is waking up in us maybe with the sextile. We are allowed to start using it and to see how we can start dreaming about a reality which is beyond the Saturnian reality, getting out of the first cycle of Saturn, of the childhood cycle, where we can potentially discover our true direction and individual direction. Then the square is at 42 to make our life even more difficult, a choice, a turning of direction, and potentially a difficult time with Neptune at midlife. And then around 55, we have a trine, which may be alluding to the fact that Neptune being so slow and being so connected to spirituality and the beyond in a way, is supposed to be getting easier and easier and easier to work with as we get older, if things are well. I don't know if you agree with that. But I guess if you're older, especially around the 82, I'm sorry Raven is not with us today because she's 82. And I hope that she can be a good example of someone experiencing Neptune opposite Neptune right now. To talk about how this all feels, because it's supposed to be a time of really letting go of all the negativity of the past and all the all sorts of misunderstandings that may have happened, disappointments, and really preparing yourself to get rid of all that you don't need, which is the essence of Neptune, those attachments to things that are more of a burden than creative. So what do you want to say about all this? And do you identify with any of these ages as an important time when something Neptunian? It's a slow process, by the way, just to say, with Neptune. It's not like with Uranus, sudden and unexpected. Here we are gradually changing our feelings and our attitude towards something under the influence of it. So how do you feel about this?
Particularly interesting is that the period where Neptune was in Aquarius is
Mhm.
where the internet kind of took off from one perspective. And it's also the time of 9/11. And I feel that this was a switchover for Aquarius. In this case, I'm talking about social groupings and expanded a little bit to cultures. And so I feel like that, well, but I'm not really historically inclined. So I'm nervous to say anything else. And then Pisces is actually when the first iPhone started coming out. And one of the things that I've noticed about the iPhones is just like everything is there. It's our interconnected access to the whole universe of information. And this for me is like really indicative of Neptune and Pisces. And I asked myself about Neptune entering in Aries, because that signifies like a new story in terms
Yes.
of grammar, right? Which suggests to me like this would be the time. So that would be what, 2026, 27?
25, 26. Mhm.
When artificial intelligence would probably be a more central aspect of our day-to-day life, because then it's kind of like, again, kind of really shifting reality to a new paradigm we haven't experienced. But of course, I don't know. I'm just thinking about the symbols.
Yeah, well, you are kind of seeing now the generations, and among us today, there were lots of people with Neptune in Sagittarius, and there were lots with Neptune in Libra. So I thought maybe when we see the generations years, we can speak about how you've experienced your generation through the perspective of Neptune in that sign. So Sam, Jason, and Robin, and maybe also you, Emo. I'm not sure. No, you're younger, so yours must be Aquarius. Is it Aquarius?
Capricorn.
Aquarius. So yeah, you are quite an interesting case because when you said the internet kicked off, it was actually around the time there was the conjunction of Neptune and Uranus and all the rest of them in Capricorn. But then after that, Uranus also was in Aquarius. So I think beginning of the 90s, both of them were in Aquarius, and maybe Uranus is a bit more to, let's say, to blame for that trend, but both of them actually. And then the first iPhone came in 2007, and I'm mostly connected to Pluto's switching from Aquarius. So how was it, from Aquarius to Capricorn? As that was 2008. So I guess, yeah, but still we are there. We are within that same
And
Pisces and Aquarius transition point.
when I looked at the Neptune in Libra, it was also for a generation with the sextile to Pluto.
Not only that generation, Lauren, all of the generations. This started in the around 20s, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe the 40s. I can double check that. But from then until now, everybody has it, this sextile. Yeah, because they are in lockstep. The two planets are in lockstep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just.
But anyway, it's significant somehow.
Very, very. Remember, we spoke about this in my
Yeah.
other talk about Neptune. So I'm just conscious not to repeat the same things. But yeah, it was that they are moving in the same speed. Only doing that for this thing about moving in the same speed is only for a fraction of their common cycle, and we happen to be living in that time. And what is more is that they're in a sextile, which is like a double interesting thing in a way, to be born and live in these several generations. And if you remember at the time, we said that this is to do with Neptune and Pluto introducing us as a society, as an overall community, to the idea of working out our own psychology. For the first time, we are opening up to spirituality and psychology together, and we are going in that direction to explore something that wasn't the case before.
Like they have, the way I thought of it is, you become your own guru, you become your own teacher.
Oh, you're looking for information simply. I mean, you're looking to develop yourself. Jung, that has an aspect between his Sun and Neptune, had most of his active years in that period when Neptune was in Leo, and actually started most of his individual work in that period. And he's a Leo Sun. So you see how that's very interesting altogether, I believe. And it all started from him and Freud as a trend of, as a society, to explore psychology now in a different way. And for this to be needed, finally.
And the other thing I see when I look at your information is, I am 68 and a half right now, and my Neptune is exactly quincunx, my Neptune.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in my chart as well. That's that Mercury at the quincunx of the finger of God formation there.
See, so the quincunx, what is that supposed to be for you? How do you understand the Neptune quincunx Neptune stage? What do you think is the essence of what needs to happen there?
I don't know. I haven't thought of it. It's like seeing it today for the first time and realizing it.
Well, I think, I mean, I don't know a lot about it, but in my mind, the quincunx is very similar to the sixth house or to Virgo kind of process. If you look at the, those circles where we can see the aspects coming one after the other and one after the other, you can see that the quincunx is there in this transition point, just before the opposition, almost like just before the full moon, or however you want to imagine it. And it's a time for discrimination. So you need to sort Neptunian topics in your head. This belongs here, this belongs there. That's to be thrown away, that's to be kept. This is important, that wasn't that important. I was like preparing for the opposition, but it's the kind of process that we do with Virgo and with, say, the sixth house process.
The Neptunian spirit is not going to be easy.
Yes, because it's
I
the opposite.
If answering, I think of quincunx as a destiny line.
Isn't it everything a destiny
like
line?
A mission for me of you. It's something that you decided. Maybe I'm doing it with the finger of God now, but I just, I decided before I was born I was going to do this, and now it's time to look at it, whatever that might be.
Okay, so maybe something like a time for sorting things, putting things in order.
And certainly if I'm going to move and change states of where I live, that's going to take an enormous sorting of what's important, what to leave behind.
Yes, but it's more like a spiritual sorting, that one, not that much physical, isn't it? So we are saying on the grounds of Neptune, you need to do Virgo work. So these two doesn't need to be contradictory necessarily to one another, because sometimes maybe we need to clear our own thoughts, our own beliefs, influences, stuff like that. Everything Neptunian, that the way you understand Neptune for yourself, that will be under microscope at the moment. You would be examining it. That's what you're supposed to do with the quincunx, so that this doesn't weigh heavy on you later, in the later years, when you get to the 82 stage, for example. Yeah. Anyone else at the moment has one of those crucial stages of Neptune?
I'm not quite at age 42. I'm not quite there. I still have a few years to go, but I have a sibling of mine that is there. And also I think that time or that age falls into what people culturally think of as midlife or midlife crisis.
Yeah.
And so that makes a lot of sense about Neptune, square Neptune, where you reach a point of kind of accepting that there's been a deal of illusion in your life, and it's kind of a disillusion of whatever ideals you held up. And it's a point in your life where you think about, was this suffering that I had, was it necessary? The ways that I conformed, was my conforming, was that necessary? And so I think that's what Neptune, square Neptune is at that point, is you're kind of forced into looking at where you are versus that ideal that you had the whole time, getting there. and understanding the gap between those two things. My brother, he's in Neptune and Sagittarius age range with me as well. And for him, I recently reached out to him to be a mentor to someone who is interested in his career field. Um, he's an electrical engineer, or that was his career track. And I was, hoping that he was going to encourage the young man, and he did, and he was, very supportive in that. But he feels completely, um, I won't say undersold, but the fact that, he went through a 4-year university is something he feels a lot of disillusion about, because it's not necessary for, he understands now that there are ways to get to where he is. It doesn't necessarily include that. And it was, something that was difficult for him. It was a lot of different things involved and a lot of ups and downs. And so, to me, that points to us, our Neptune and Sagittarius generation, where we were really sold on higher education as this, freedom. Higher education was the answer to all things. It was the end all be all. And to go to a brick and mortar, 4-year university was your ticket to whatever ideal life you had in mind. And now there's a lot of people who were sold on that, through the 80s, through the 90s, who are in their, midlife, and they say, you know what? I don't remember the majority of what I learned in university. I don't remember the majority of what I was taught, or these are things that I learned that I don't actually use in my day to day. And so, what was it all for? Yes, there's a foundational knowledge that kind of allowed me to step into this space, but the way that we transfer knowledge from one to the other, you know, there's a lot of feelings of, is this the way? There has to be a better way. And then you couple that with the fact that there are a lot of people who are crushed under student loan debt on top of that, who feel, they're like, there's no way that this was worth it. There's no way that, to be financially penalized for several years, decades after the fact, for something that you don't even retain the majority of that knowledge. There's no way that was worth it, even though they may have enjoyed, freedom or positive experiences going through university. So I see that kind of popping up for people in that age group right now, where um, the scales are falling from our eyes around what it means to have higher education.
Yes, yes, that's such a big trend out there, and how it comes that for exactly that generation, this happens to be the disillusionment point. While the previous one, maybe that same idea, same dream could have worked out, but the world changed in the meantime. Something in the process out there changed, education changed, its connection to the, to this, what happens afterwards changed. And you happen to be born in that generation with Neptune and Sagittarius, where you maybe are meant to collectively experience that eye-opening thing that we are now supposed to be looking for alternative ways of, seeing how to develop our skills and how to come up to what we believe in, and so on and so forth. All those Sagittarian topics that we can think of.
What is
Exactly.
interesting is, Radalina, you gave that same example, having Neptune in Capricorn. You gave that same about the illusion of the government or the big corporations that you were going to have careers with. I think of
Yeah.
both of my daughters. They were 88 and 90, and one, they both went through highest education, came out with various loans and debt and things like that. So it is part of that would have been that Neptune in Capricorn where they feel a
Yes.
certain disillusion now about it.
Yeah, and I think this is probably something very Western world kind of countries, mostly typical. And I may be a bit prejudiced because I lived in London, and this is probably the most exemplary place of this trend, because England as a whole is a Capricornian country. The whole system is very like the epitome of what we understand as the system. Banks, government agencies, insurance companies, the financial world, and stuff like that. And I went to university studying business because at the time I didn't really haven't made up my mind what I really want to do. And I had prepared for that university for many years. And it was just, let's go with it. From first year, I kind of knew that this is very Neptunian without having known what Neptune is at the time. But I knew that this is not going to work out because there are lots of things here falling apart, which are not what they're presented to be. But I don't know what saved me from this, but everybody that I saw, I mean, most of the people around and this whole generation bought the idea of this corporate world dream. And very soon after 2008-9, it all started falling apart from the financial crisis onwards. And I graduated around then, and most of my classmates were heading up for the corporate world, and they were looking for jobs. They couldn't find any for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years sometimes, and it was all like appearing not to make sense. Even when they started, speaking with them after years, there was this disappointment that here there is something that is not quite what we expected. And maybe it's our problem that we expected it. But isn't it that every generation is kind of also sold the dream? You know, through the media, through the trend of the time, through the overall, like what people talk among themselves. You almost like sold the dream. And it's up to you, your own character, your own chart, whether you're going to buy into it or not. But maybe I escaped from this deception, but went into another kind of Capricornian deception. You know, you can never escape, I think, the symbol in your chart. So it's interesting how it. We have to be. I mean, if you have children now, for example, and they're not yet mature, maybe it's good to look at their chart and see, oh, where is Neptune? How do I somehow give those signs? Be careful when we speak about these particular topics. Don't go for it very quickly because these particular things need to be looked at carefully in your case. Yeah.
Good luck with that. My children didn't, I was like a voice that they weren't interested in.
Well, that was what
I
it's
was
supposed
for
to be.
warning, they would just, people come with their own predispositions to what they believe in, I
Yeah.
think.
And maybe we need to go through some of those mistakes,
Yeah.
especially the Neptunian ones, because aren't you the most free when you are free from your illusions? And sometimes everything needs to fall apart in front of your eyes and for you to be extremely disappointed and feel like you're an idiot for believing it or going along with it or whatever, in order to then not be like a slave of that same illusion, following it over the course of your life and being free to move on to something else. But that's the burden of Neptune, that usually when things go wrong with Neptune and we start needing the redemption and all those negative feelings, is when we cannot forgive ourselves for falling into the trap of some illusion after the fact, and just can't make peace with it. We keep thinking about it. We keep like, I don't know, maybe.
I agree, even though it's cultural. So I think that goes back to, I guess, redemption. When we were discussing that, I kept thinking about the word grace. That's where Neptune comes in for me, is it's allowing yourself to be human. It's allowing yourself to be vulnerable and to be swept up in, whether you call it swept up in spirit or swept up in whatever the collective unconscious is, and you allow for it, and you accept it and say that it's okay that I walked into this dream because everyone else walked with me.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
we were all in the dream together. I think about the Neptune and Aquarius generation being sold the dream of technology and how technology was supposed to, basically liberate us to live these deeply luxurious lives, where you type in a few buttons and, all this fantastical things is supposed to happen. And it was supposed to go that route. And with the Neptune in Pisces generation, we're really, we see the rise of social media during that time. And there's this dream that anyone can be famous. Anyone can be, the ideal. Anyone can be the ideal. How many people were just at home in their bedrooms and they said or did something that went viral and they become, memorialized, through a meme or something else. And it's going to be very interesting, I think, to see what the reality check from that becomes. I know we're still a ways off, but
we already see it, don't we, Robin?
yeah.
You see those on the other side of the social media thing is how not only you can out of a sudden decide you're very important because somebody, I mean, lots of people started following you or things like this, but you can also get very depressed and downtrodden for not achieving the same fame or, it appears to be those appearances, those deceptive appearances that social media usually presents leads lots of teenagers, for example, into those depressive moods, suicidal moods, where they are trying to catch up all the time with others there in social media and to follow a certain trend that's not even real. I feel like this time that we live in through now is one of the scariest. Neptune in its own sign in Pisces. How more Piscean could this be? And it's getting very hard emotionally, I feel. Everybody is very tense, especially young people that belong to this generation. I think they're very vulnerable to this totally blurred idea. Where do my personality start? How do I define myself? What's my value? And usually their value, if they are participating in social media, as most of them are, is defined by their success there. And it's crazy. It's very, very emotionally difficult, I think. And I guess when we get to Aries, we're going to start understanding how much damage was done during the Pisces time.
Yeah. The illusion is that the ideal can be reached,
Exactly.
that the ideal is right there and that fame is right there. And people who are a little bit older, we realize that, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't add up.
Exactly.
But if you see people around you and your peers who are able to achieve it, then like you said, you don't have anything to compare that to. So it becomes self-focused of what's wrong with me. Why didn't I reach the ideal? Why didn't this work for me if it worked for someone who is right next to me that I perceive?
Exactly. And also this thing about wanting it to be quick. I don't know if you've thought about this. How Neptune, when Neptune is negative, sometimes it can make people want to achieve something without too much effort, almost like the sense of entitlement. There could be something like that.
Gambler's disease.
How is it called, Lauren?
Well, I think of it as gambler's disease.
Yes. Usually gamblers belong to.
They want to become rich very quick. And it's like quicksand because the more you lose, the more you have to keep going.
Exactly. So I guess there is another trend we can see in the younger generation of Pisces, Neptune, that they're really thinking most of the time, and everybody's thinking like that around them. So who can blame them? This is the trend of the time right now, that it is possible, and obviously demonstrably it's possible. Certain people become, say, famous overnight, but then how long would that last
And
for?
did it really bring the whole point of everything here is, did it really bring true happiness and purpose in life?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you see, with Neptune, it's so tempting for someone or something else from outside to offer you a purpose on a plate. Here is your purpose. Here is your dream, and you just consume it. And we live in a very quickly consuming time, isn't it? And we don't always think about what's the actual value and based underneath this, which is ultimately very Saturnian, isn't it? Slowly but surely, gradually, getting skills or getting ahead or having something that's durable and so on. That's not in fashion right now. With so much Neptune and Pisces and so on and so forth, the overall trend, what people strive for, dream for, instinctively is not the fashion of the time. And things will change, of course, but currently we are in this cloud.
So really it's to look at both where one came in, what are you born with?
Yes.
But then to observe what it was like living in these other time periods.
Yes, exactly. As Neptune is one of the best examples of a force which gives its stamp on the times and the spirit of the times, what they call the zeitgeist. That's the core of it is the Neptunian generation. Usually one generation is actually considered to be astrologically when Pluto travels to one sign, and in the same time Neptune goes through two. I mean, these are not exact dates, but normally we have this while Neptune is in two consecutive signs, one female, one male, one on the one side of the polarity, the other of the other, consecutive signs. At the same time, Pluto goes through one sign, pretty much. Yeah, and this is considered to be a generation proper in astrology, and we can observe all sorts of different trends around that. Whether you were born, so I was born with Pluto in Scorpio. Part of that had Neptune in Sagittarius. Part of that has Neptune in Capricorn. Yeah, and there are two groups of people: Pluto in Scorpio with Sagittarius Neptune, or with Capricorn Neptune, and they obviously see things differently in the trends of their time.
I was thinking Neptune and Scorpio, like that was the beginning of the sexual
revolution. Yeah.
Or opening, yeah, and scandal and all the rest of it. And
yeah, Jean-Marc, what would you say about Neptune in Scorpio? You have it conjunct your sun.
Yeah, the black tide. No, what could I say about
black tie?
Yeah, how do you say when
what are you fascinated by having Neptune in Scorpio?
An example, it's one of the story I've written in which was metaphorical for, and it helped me think my own psychological state, was the story of how to call, you understand black tide, or I have the wrong word?
Do you mean a black tie event, like glamour? That is
Like,
what you think? TIE, tie, like a man's tie?
No, when the sea is black because of petrol.
Oh,
Oil
tide.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oil slick, and the metaphor was the white bird, a seagull that was caught in the oil slick, and then it was covered with oil, and it couldn't fly anymore, and it's a dive into the deep dark feelings of the collective unconscious. Because there's a lot to become aware of, and to cleanse, and to learn how to deal with. So it's very obviously very psychological.
Yes, and you see it coincides with the 60s.
And all the music of the 70s. Listen to Pink Floyd.
Yes, Pink Floyd has always been a very scorpionic, I don't know if you agree, but I always found them very scorpionic, really loved them when I was younger. Anyway, but yeah, Pluto and Scorpio is supposed to be fascinated by all the taboo topics, isn't it? And your whole generation, during several years was really on this a lot, especially during the 60s.
Yes,
This almost rebellious,
yeah.
let's explore everything to do with Scorpio freely now for the first time. And
we had Uranus Pluto at the same time.
yes,
So,
reinforced by Uranus, and Pluto. So
so that's why I'm so shocked sometimes by the current mentality,
mhm.
Because it becomes so rigid now. All this the thing around sexuality. Talking about Neptune, I've just finished a book by a British philosopher and feminist, and the subtitle is you can see
Why reality matters is all I see.
for
Feminism.
for feminism, and
Could you read the subtitle? It didn't come out.
why reality matters
Why? Oh, just that. Why reality
For
matters.
feminism.
Okay.
for feminism.
Feminism.
But basically she made the point, because talking about Neptune, it's really a masterpiece to be able to convince most institutions that actually sex doesn't matter, and that you can't see men as men and women as women, because there are all the transactivism makes you can look like a woman and actually be a man, or you can look like a man and have everything that a man has and be actually a woman. That's incredible.
This is very Piscean. That's the expression of Pisces, Neptune in Pisces nowadays.
And it's so confusing. So you see, and recently I've watched a video about the labor, the new leader of the Labour Party was interviewed about this question of genders, and it was so difficult because you just can't use the word woman without being in danger of saying something politically incorrect, which will make him lose part of his support, or vice versa. There are people who lose their jobs. Why? Because they believe that women are women. Things as basic as that. It's such a Neptunian masterpiece, I think.
Mhm. When you look back in history, you would see that every time Neptune was in Pisces, there was a rise in all sorts of ideologies, which were along similar lines, separating people in different groups. Back in time, it was on different grounds, not like today, it's the topic of gender and stuff like this, which is very trendy. Then it was something else, but when you look at it, it's pretty much the same thing. So every 160 years, more or less.
When was the last time?
160 years back. Just calculating that quickly. I haven't really checked, but the rise of those kind of, almost like they say, totalitarian style ideologies, which are very much looking into these discriminatory, either between classes of people or between all sorts of different ways you can divide. And this is the epitome of negative Neptune. It's this thing of, let's see how we are separate at the end of the day, rather than how we can be all inclusive, how we can be all together, how we can, go beyond those things. And when you look at these trends, they start as a Neptunian vision, and they end up as a Saturnian tyranny. Usually, that's the way. That's the usual. Because
what's very interesting is precisely with the transactivism, and is the purpose is to be inclusive, and they
start as a very nice idea.
And yes, that's absolutely perfectly legitimate and beautiful and ideal, that we live in a society where we are all included and equal and treated, and from being all inclusive, you have you can't just call women because you just get rid of sex, and people have to say people who menstruate instead of saying women, because
yeah, well, this is one of the trends that's going to pass, I feel. Like everything else of this sort, when it goes to an extreme and it's no longer making any sense, there are self-regulatory things there that will bring us back to, let's say, normal. But yeah, I agree with you.
I mean, when I think about the time we're living in right now, it's terribly like authoritative and
Yeah.
not at all inclusive, but apartheids of this and that, government edicts and this and that. And so it's just not feeling very inclusive.
Just to remind you that Neptune is squaring the nodes. And during this whole pandemic time, the nodes in Sagittarius and Gemini were squaring Neptune. And that's part of the story, I think, as well, of why the crux of the matter is things like beliefs, ideas, opinions, authority, and those topics. Why them and not others? I guess
Yeah,
has
and
to do with it.
Saturn at the same time having to deal with Pluto.
Yeah.
With Saturn was not really able to balance Neptune.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. And everything is going to change in a few years. Everything is shifting. I mean, it's not going to change overnight, I guess, but we are going to have Neptune in Aries, Uranus in Gemini, Pluto in Aquarius.
Another thing I wanted to mention about Neptune in Sagittarius is that didn't that seem like well, for me, it seemed like the opening of airplanes and travel. Because when I arrived in Ibiza in 1975, Ibiza didn't even, it was like a very one little plane. The airport didn't even have there. I don't know. It just seemed, I remember growing up and that whole thing exploded of even going to an airport and being really excited. Oh my God, there's an airport and planes taking off. It wasn't as dominant. And I think it opened up in the 70s to 84.
I guess you're right. And now you just made me think something right in the moment, which I hadn't been before. But would it turn out that this whole globalism that we were experiencing in the last several decades, the travel, the open borders, all the immense opportunities, the mixture of different cultures and people, we can see how this immediately stopped with this crisis. It was kind of put on an end. Maybe it's never going to be the same again. And would it turn out that this was some sort of Neptunian illusion from the past? And now this is turning out that it was very fragile at the end of the day. It wasn't really as ubiquitous as we thought it is. Yeah, and out of a sudden we cannot move again. Out of a sudden we are restricted again as we were before these dates of this Sagittarius one. I don't know.
I'm also thinking about the book 1984 and how Neptune in Sagittarius was switching to Neptune in Capricorn. Yeah. And there's a very famous book, I'm sure all of us are familiar with, 1984. Or are we?
Yes, yes, which was written a long time before 1984. It was in 48, if I'm not mistaken, something like that.
My thing is like projecting it to that time period.
So how much he kind of sensed when the book will be relevant, exactly that time. Yes. Well, there is just one more page as we're approaching the end. I wanted to show you also the crossings of the points in the chart, the angles, because you mentioned some of those things before, that some of you have that. So apart from Jason having Neptune cross the descendant, any other crossings of Neptune of the angles right now? Do you have it cross one of your angles? No?
I'm going to make another note as well. Not only is Neptune crossing the descendant, but it's also squaring my nodes too. So I've got all of my angles are lit up with this Neptune transit. So it's going to be affecting all of the foundational points of my life.
That's pretty important for you then.
Very much so.
Yeah, you actually made a very important point also, that whenever something is touching one angle, it is automatically touching all the rest of them, or at least the opposite one. Yeah,
that's correct.
So yeah, sometimes they're not in a square the MC and so how it's called, the vertical and the horizontal axis. Sometimes they're not in a square, but most of the time everything gets lit up at the same time, and maybe that's why those points are so powerful, because they activate the whole cross of the chart. And when Neptune does this, the effect is supposed to be pretty significant, as Neptune is a slow-moving but very uncompromising transformer, isn't it? That you really cannot avoid the lesson of Neptune when it comes to you. And we would experience in one lifetime, if it's a long lifetime, up to say over 80 years, we would experience maximum 2 crossings of Neptune, maybe in very, very rare cases 3 of angles. So the question is, which angles would it cross in your lifetime? I had it cross my MC, and then I'll probably have it cross my ascendant one day. But that's gonna be it. I'm never gonna have it cross my descendant or IC. Yeah. So that
And the different areas of the chart obviously have different symbolic ties. So I mean, if a person has a Neptune crossing the upper portion of the chart, that's something that's going to be a lot more out in the public domain, the public sphere. But someone who's got it transiting through the 4th house and the 7th or the lower portion of the chart, that's more of a private domain. So that experience is not necessarily going to be quite so out there. It's going to be a much more internalized process.
Exactly.
So
yeah, very well said. Yeah.
Jason. And I would love to hear what's happening for you directly as far as you experience Neptune on the descendant.
Same here.
Something I've observed is that, well, how often have I observed it? I observed it a week ago. When planets come above the descendant, so they're crossing into the 7th house, especially something like Neptune, this is what I think, but you can confirm. They've been in the private sphere the whole life, and now suddenly they're above ground. And so from being an internal process, they become an external reality. This is the way I see it, but I don't know. So do you see something like that happening for you?
I think that's accurate. And I mean, that symbolically makes sense in terms of the chart too, because now you're seeing the portion of the sky that's visible from an observer on the ground. So the fact that that planet is now rising into view means that there's definitely something that has been hidden, which is the portion of the transit underneath in the lower part of the chart is now rising. It means now it's time to take all of that Neptunian processes and experiences and going through the sorting out what's real, what isn't, what illusions can I get rid of, what can I kind of work through and try to add value in my life. And I think that's part of this whole process. So I mean, this particular transit it's affecting me in very deep ways that it's going to be hard to assess for many years. Crossing the descendant is one thing, squaring the other, the midheaven and the IC is another thing, opposing the ascendant is another thing. I've got my nodes right on the MC-IC axis as well. So the Neptune is squaring all that. So there's Venus I have just behind where Neptune is as well. So there's a lot of Venusian 7th house type energy that's coming in with this Neptunian thing. And ideally, what I want to start working towards now is becoming a professional astrologer and doing it full time out in the world. And I'm hoping this might be one of the baby steps to kind of working towards doing that for other people.
Very interesting, because you can be triggered by other people, maybe partner with them for what comes to your mind for the future, maybe. And also you can be opposed by them. So it concocts all sorts of dramas around interactions and opportunities and fights and whatever. So new friends, new enemies in a way.
There we go.
Hopefully a part of the friends circle.
I hope so too. We don't need any enemies. There's enough of that going on in the world. We need to have more friendships than enemies.
But maybe we can have challenges from other how people do it in another way, which we don't quite like. So this just triggers you to be a good example, to be a better example, create something more, accordance to your vision. So sometimes we need that. We need to see so-called negative expressions of things out there in order to feel like we need to act as well.
Absolutely. And the whole talk of encompassing experiences, which Neptune ties in, I mean, that makes sense because it is about opening the door. It's about not having the Saturnian rigidity about this is the way things are supposed to be. This is the way they're supposed to go forward. This is about taking all of those rigid expectations and throwing them out the door. It's like the reality is that the world doesn't just follow suit to what our expectations are. So Neptune puts us into the sphere where those expectations are thrown out the window. It's like, now I'm going to put you out into a sphere where there is none. So now you're going to have to learn to swim in the waters with the fish and the sharks and everything else and figure out how to not drown and get eaten. I mean, that's part of the whole travel.
Yeah.
What's that happening for you, like directly?
What was that, Emo?
How is that happening for you directly, like in your everyday life?
At this point, there's no direct effect. I wouldn't look at the Neptunian transit like over an angle as being an event. I see it more as a process. I don't see it as something that's very definitive in one point in time. I see it more as a transitional time where starting to look at moving away from the personal sphere and moving more into a more public sphere, shall we say. It's kind of the transition. So at this point, I can't say anything directly about the movement of that, but in terms of my overall direction in life, I would say it's basically up in the air for sure. I can't tell what I want to do with myself, where I want to orientate myself, what I want to focus on. That is very much in question right now, and I think that's strongly Neptunian.
Yes, it should be a bit invisible.
Contemplating more being a professional astrologer and helping people.
Very much so.
So are you taking steps towards that? Have you started to work with clients?
Not yet. I'm currently at a place where I'm going to start to work a plan to try to develop some kind of maybe a website or some kind of social media contact, something to kind of get the ball rolling. It's kind of a new area for me. I don't have experience with that. So it's going to be kind of a feely type of a process, which again is Neptunian very much in what we're discussing. But I've been around astrology since I was a teenager. So, I mean, I've got 30 plus years of background and experience with the topic. So, I mean, I should have enough tools in the toolkit to be able to work with and move forward to offer help to people. It's just, again, developing that capacity to put myself out there in a way that I can move forward with it. That's the challenge.
Can I tell a story?
Go for it.
Okay. But Radalina, would you mind if I shared the screen so I can show the charts?
I think try, let's see if I need to give you a permission or something. I'm not sure how the settings are, but try and we'll see.
Let's see.
Just to tell you guys, we have another 10 minutes, let's say, so that we don't make it too long, even though I would like to stay and talk to you even longer. But
I wanted to quickly ask, Emma, are you in New York right now, or are you in Europe?
we never know where he is. He's in a Neptunian fashion constantly.
Who, me?
No, I was asking Emma, but he seems to be frozen right now. Are
Yeah,
you there?
something happened with his connection.
Here he is again.
Okay, I'm back.
Did you hear? I asked where are you located currently, in New York or Europe?
Yeah, I'm in Europe. I'm in Bulgaria.
Bulgaria. Thank you.
Whereabouts?
Wha-
Varna. Are you gonna stay?
I have no idea. And I'm still, oh wait, I can share a screen. No, host disabled, participant screen sharing.
All right. Well, what would you like to share with us? Let me see if I can make you.
Yes.
Okay,
Hopefully.
try now. You're a co-host now, so you can do it.
Yay!
Okay. Hold on. No, hold on.
Don't go too quick. We need time
No,
to grasp it.
I'm just setting everything up. 'Cause I didn't do
Together.
that. And I'll do the transits outside. And then.
And what software is this one?
This is Astro Gold.
Astro Gold.
So I'm hoping that it's not too confusing. I'll just start with these two because they're the ones that really matter. So the chart on the inside is my natal chart. And then I've only put the important planets because the other ones are not a part of the story. Of course, all of them are part of the story, but just to make it more simple. And well, I don't know, it's probably too much with 3 charts. I'll just go like this. So you can see that the second chart on the outside is next. Both of them at 25 degrees. Seem really cute at 20.
You're breaking up a little bit.
A lot.
It's not the best internet out there in Bulgaria, is it?
Well, it's not the best internet in my room at grandma's house. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Better, yes.
Okay. So it's fine. I didn't say anything that important. So what I've understood about the progressed moon from my own research, directly experiencing my life, is that it kind of dictates the emotional thematic experience of life that I'm in right now. So I'm like meeting Neptune at the moment, and basically my life is an expression of Neptune because the progressed moon is there. And if we look at transits, it's interesting to notice that transit Neptune at 21 degrees is in a long-term square to my natal Venus. So this activation from the moon to Neptune is activating Neptune here in square to Venus, and it's activating transit Pluto on top of natal Neptune. Okay, now it's all going to make sense when I actually tell the story. So what happened is about a month and a half ago, and it made sense to me when you were talking about Neptune in Pisces, right, Alina? That is squaring both of the transit nodes in Gemini and Sagittarius. I basically had an awakening to how much information is available on the internet. That everyone can just go and you can follow any kind of healer, any kind of astrologer, you can look at any kind of recipes, any kind of nutrition plans, any kind of fitness this, guru that. And I kind of got sick of it. Like I just suddenly felt like there's just too much and I don't know which of it is real and I don't know which of it is useful and I don't know which of it is coherent and I don't know what were the twisted motives of the person who was writing this. I don't know at what level they have embodied the information, and I was like, I just started rejecting everything, all books, everything I have learned, everything I have been taught. I had a lot of memories start coming up and a lot of interesting dreams that were telling me about what was happening in my life. Basically, when this happened to me, I stopped doing everything. I just went into a complete period of silence. I deleted Facebook and Instagram. I just can't be on them anymore. I can't read anything that is happening anywhere. All I can do is lay in bed this whole period, stare at the ceiling, or stare at my sheets, or stare at the blanket, and just sit here for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And in this way, I'm emptying myself. And what's interesting about the conversation earlier is that what is happening at a deeper level is I'm seeking redemption because of all the wrongdoings that I have been put through in my life. You know, as a child, I was forced to undergo all of these various tests that I didn't choose for myself. Somebody else decided that I have to learn this at this time, at this age, and behave like this in this store, and so on and so forth. It came to understand that I had actually designed a false identity that was perfectly fitting to what others had expected of me throughout my life. And this thing basically just started crumbling in front of my eyes, I would say about 3 weeks to a month in a big way before the progressed moon made contact to progress Neptune. In this time as well, if we talk about self-harm, which was one of them, I am deep in my most damaging patterns. So basically in the past 2 or 3 weeks, I have smoked weed every single day, multiple times a day, and I binge eat at least once or twice a day, sometimes not so much, while at the same time holding in mind the perfect lifestyle that I know I'm building towards once I complete viewing all of these different patterns in my life and understanding them to completion to this end. Very interesting. On August 24th, the transit moon was conjunct transit Neptune, and a bunch of other things. No, that was actually on September 6th. Doesn't really matter. I started a project where I basically observe what's happening in the chart each day through transit in my chart and in anyone else around me. And I just write it down. And so I started making all of these analyses about what is happening in real life when planets are making different aspect to each other. Because I got sick of all the books on astrology. I thought I just can't trust any of it anymore. I don't know which of this is fallen. I don't know how this person delivered this information. I don't know what they've studied. And I think that the system of astrology itself is in need of renovation. And there's just things missing. I just have this deep feeling in myself that things are missing. And I can't find them if I read what people have already published. And so this time, basically, I'm really empty. And at the same time, I'm drugged out. And at the same time, I'm deeply lost in astrology. Like it's just the only thing that I do, basically. If I'm looking at my phone, I'm writing about it or I'm studying it in transit. And then in transit with other people's lives and their progressions and seeing how these things come together and then how you get it. And what I would say in regards to glamour is that I had glamorized all of these different potentials that external parties had offered to me as a way towards success or validation or recognition. And I was like, this is all false, illusory nonsense. Like, this is not me. This is things that other people have created. I cannot possibly find what is true, what is my path. If I'm looking to make money or become an astrologer or be this or be that. So I notice how much I'm pretending, like how much I'm pretending. And for this, I'm seeking redemption as well, because I've lived from a false negative ego persona in my entire life. And this whole Neptune thing, I'm just subsuming, like I'm completely surrendering everything that I've done up until now. I don't want it anymore. I don't understand it. I can't relate to it. I'm disconnected from it. And in this, basically, my whole persona is shifting. Maybe it's not perceptible to outside people, I don't know, but internally I know, because I'm very close to my soul. And so I'm having all of these different experiences of kind of dissipating reality, holding the perfect reality in sight, and no longer believing the voices that tell me I'm just dreaming or I'm unrealistic, because I don't care anymore. I'm not attached to this ego the way I was before. So people can shit on me. I just don't believe in what's happening. And I'm going to act on that. And this is what Neptune has signified so far. And so I feel like I'm in some kind of mystical awakening experience. It's also very, 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 very mundane. You know, it's just kind of like, wow, I'm alive in this body. That sucks. But like at a very, very deep level for hours and hours every day. Okay. And I tell you all that because I see that from my direct experience of astrology, the planets are teaching themselves, right, through whatever it is that's going on in me. And in this journal also, I've written a bunch about what's happening when Neptune is rising, when Neptune is on the midheaven, when other planets are aspecting Neptune, every planet, every time it makes an aspect. And I could read some of those if we had more time, but I won't, obviously, since we spent all this here.
Yes.
So anyway, like falling in love.
Would you mind me just quickly, maybe as a final thing, just giving you a bit of a, I don't know, my impression on this whole thing that you just shared, just as an alternative, maybe a bit of a challenge to you. Hope you don't mind. Just something that came to my mind while I was listening to you. On the one hand, thumbs up for this experiential approach to astrology, and I have to do a bit more of that too, because that's how I think we really discover how these symbols are coming into context in our times, also in our life, in the reality of the situation around, putting them into context, which is great. And I think with this moon at the midheaven in Aquarius, with all these very mental energies that you have, you've demonstrated so many times how smart you are in this extreme kind of improvised way, Uranian way, let's say. That's great. The Neptunian part of things, I have seen in some other people around me, friends and so on, a very similar trend to what you described. What happens usually is that if you haven't been into the glamour of some Neptunian dream of success, social success, yours is in Capricorn, isn't it? So what it means to be successful, all the different types of offered definitions out there, they're all very social. So we get hooked to one or the other or several, one after the other. We try one, it disappoints us, we move on to the next. I think if you start realizing that some of those things were empty and they were not what they supposed to be, reacting exactly the opposite way and surrendering it all could be actually the same thing, but on the opposite direction. I hope this makes sense what I'm saying. Do you see what I'm saying? That the complete surrender, I don't want to read any books because none of them give a complete, or accurate or reliable information. I don't find that this is the right approach. That's not the middle approach. The middle approach is keep searching, but be more discriminative. Be more Virgo than Pisces. Don't look for the ideal, for the next ideal, which is a better ideal, which is a more, solving things ideal. As that would disappoint too. There would come a time when this state of surrender would be too much, and you would be willing to again start exploring information and things like that. And you have Venus in Gemini at the end of the day. You would need that. You would need to be fed that external information. But I think the point here with your case, probably, if I'm to consult you, I mean, everyone has their own way, is to try to find a middle ground, not go from one extreme to the other. As actually very often a disappointment, a fair disappointment with something Neptunian leads us to something even more Neptunian on the other side. You see, and even more self-destructive, as we only get really disappointed when we were expecting a lot to start with. So isn't the point to not be expecting too much, but be open to all sorts of different, things that may come your way, and be okay if they don't inspire you very much, if they don't solve your problem, if they don't really resonate. As long as this is also okay, I think that's how we can start finding our own voice. Because otherwise, we're still enslaved by the glamour of let's find something that's really cool. If action wasn't that cool, not doing anything may be better. Well, no, I think it's somewhere in the middle. Somewhere in the middle is always the right thing, isn't it? But it's so hard to find what's that thing in the middle. Do
Can
you
I?
agree with me, or do you?
I also have things come up for me when.
Yeah. Guys, feel free to comment on what Emo said,
No,
because we will finish on that note with your comments. Yeah.
Well, I just want to, of course, all about the middle path, but at the same time, I think taking for example, looking at Pluto, right on Pluto, that would be a time of possibly letting everything die, letting everything go away. And
No,
I
this
look
is progress. This is the
what?
progress Pluto, so it doesn't really move a lot. That's why it's on top of it.
Okay. All right, then but I look at it as I see it more as a time in your life that is okay to throw everything away, to detach, to turn everything off, because it will not last forever. It isn't, the middle way will come back, rather than, and that when one feels to just take a very severe action, that there's some need for that, and that you let that period of time, you live in that period of time until it won't last forever. That's one thing to say. The other thing I wanted to say was I've started to look at Swami Sri Yukteswar, who was the teacher of Paramahansa Yogananda and under the lineage of Babaji, and all of a sudden he's talking about the intuitive astrologer being so important. That and I look at you as a very intuitive, have the capacity somehow for an intuitive genius. And anyway, he's got a whole thing about astrology I'm learning about right now. But just those were my two comments to think about. If you've ever heard, do you know who I'm talking about with Sri Yukteswar, who he is? Okay, well, you're, if I have an email of you, I'll look it up. Is your email the same that I can contact you?
I likely won't read it at this point, Lauren. I'm my
Oh,
own.
'cause you're not looking at any media.
Not right. You know, I do not at all discount that at some point in the future, of course, I will be back out looking, reading, comparing, understanding. I like people's ideas. Radalina's right. I have Venus in Gemini. I just love information. I just love information.
Are
But
you not honestly trying to re-inspire yourself by changing the course of action? Excuse my Scorpio directness, but are you not actually trying to re-inspire yourself after the previous things, whatever they were? I don't know exactly what you were doing, but whatever you were having as a strategy before, okay, it's not working anymore. Isn't the Leo in you, the Venus in Gemini, all the other brilliant mind things in the chart going on? Are you not trying to re-inspire yourself by just doing something which is more of a gesture than something else? As this gesture is very crucial for you, as it needs to sparkle something again. What is it
Well,
sparkling? The Neptunian vision. So again, if you want to spare yourself from many influences, it's not through not reading books or not being on social media or that. These are just on the surface. Deeper down there are the actual things that bring us into Neptune. You know, this desire to be constantly inspired and to be constantly by something external. Yeah.
I want to offer something here.
Yes, Robin. Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like I keep looking at the moon, I keep looking at Venus, and for me, I really look at the moon as being the captain of the boat. If you're going to look at your lunar nodes and your south node, your north node, I look at the moon as the captain of the boat, the one who's driving um, the events and the emotions that are pushing you to those things that you need to learn. And for you, your moon is falling at the 29th degree of Aquarius. And when you look at the Sabian symbol for that, 29 going into the 30th degree, that is the butterfly emerging from the cocoon, going into the scene of Babylon having fallen and new flowers blossoming in the moonlight. And basically, that transition between the 29th degree and the 30th degree of Aquarius is about leaving things behind. Very literal there. It's about a complete and absolute transformation. And in that last degree of Aquarius, where it's a field of Babylon, that the ruins, everything has fallen, and you have these small flowers budding up out of the ruins. It's about this acknowledgement that at some point, everything that we have built and everything that we have held up will at some point need to come down in order for something new to take its place. And so I feel like your emotional state or your emotional way of dealing it and pushing yourself to the next level is to allow for that um, complete blankness. You're saying even staring at the ceiling, staring at the sheet, staring at the blanket, that emptying is very much about trying to pull it all down, which is what Radalina is saying, forcing yourself into whatever the next phase is. And in addition to that, your Venus being at the 24 degree of Gemini, 24 going into 25, which is the Sabian symbol for that is uh, someone pulling back the palm leaves. So it's very much about uh, getting rid of, letting go of. The saying I have for that is less is more. The opposite symbol is more about more is more and kind of exuberance, but the 25 degree of Gemini is about less is more and simplifying. So I think this is probably something that has been a theme in your life in different ways, whether you have realized it or not, where you go so far with something, a particular feeling or thing, and then you know, you will probably see this as something that reoccurs, a complete emptying, in order to kind of force yourself into uh, generating, is what I want to say, and into generating whatever's on the other side of this emptying. Once you let go of all the outside influence, you are then forcing yourself to kind of originate ideas and originate in a picture that comes from the inside versus the outside. Like your vision, you're forcing yourself into a vision that is internal as opposed to external.
I wouldn't call it forcing by any means, but I would say yeah.
Subconsciously forcing.
Robin, it's so very interesting what you said, but you made me think, when we look at the chart like this and the transit is happening, it's like Emma is showing us a few things that are ongoing kind of thing as in the chart. But what age is he at? We so often forget to focus on the age, the stage of life where the person is experiencing this transit, which another one that's older or younger can also experience. And the way I look at it is that all through the 20s, it's all about experimentation. We can't really get to the essence of this creative individual vision that would become the foundation of your own style, your own path, that would be not subjective that much to conditioning. I think we are inevitably, every one of us, conditioned by our experience, our childhood, our parents, our glamour of Neptune that we were born with, whatever it is. Until the 20s, we're battling with this. We are going to experiences of all sorts of, kinds then eventually, when we get to the major transition points around the end of the 20s, that's when it starts getting clearer. And that's when we say, not this, but that. I will focus on these things, and this is going to be my way and my style. Until then, I don't think we should be so worried about constantly jumping around if that's what's happening. Because as a most normal thing, the most normal and needed thing for the 20s, in order for you to then be able to get to that decision point. And you having this Neptune, I think, here now, maybe because at this stage you need to dispose some of the glamorous Neptunian illusions, and they clear the way slowly but surely. But I agree with Jason. Neptune is a slow force. It's not a quick force. It's not an awakener like Uranus. You're not just saying, oh, no, I just realized that this doesn't work. It's a gradual thing. And I think this is, you're being transformed, but you're also being confused. And Neptune is there for that, to confuse you. It needs to confuse you. So I think that's all very, very okay. And we don't need to expect from you to become a sage at age 20 something. 20, are you 25 or not even there yet? 24?
What does it
23?
matter?
No, it does matter. It does matter because being very wise in the 20s is an illusion. It's always an illusion.
But Radalina, what do you mean it's always an illusion? How do you know?
When you get to the Saturn return, you see what I mean. I was also thinking of myself as being a lot ahead of my years, very deep, very wise, very understanding. And I was even a bit smug about it, down deep, even without demonstrating it. When I came to that age, it's not that I suddenly felt that I don't get it or anything like this. It just balanced itself out. I understood how naive I was and how this was so normal to be naive because that was part of the enthusiasm in the 20s. And Neptune is making what was it, the sextile in the 20s? Yes. So it's supposed to be like that, I think.
Well, here's what I got out of it, which is probably just my bum hurt ego because that's where I'm at. But I'm sharing openly what I'm
That's right.
experiencing. And then I'm receiving some kind of advice and some kind of guidance that I didn't ask for. What? I just told you I don't need outside information, and you're trying to tell me how Neptune works in my chart and that I'm an illusion this and illusion that, when I just told you that that's what's happening. Why? What's the point? I'm just sharing with you directly what I actually experienced. Doesn't mean I'm
We
emotionally.
want to use you. We want to use you as an example how astrology actually works.
Well, then let's
You know?
be honest about it. Let's not say and make claims, well, it's always this and it's always that. How do you know? How do I know? How do any of us have enough experience with this to say that it's always something?
Well, is it about me saying always about something? Well, there are certain things which are generic, but there are others which are individual. So the individual ones are really individual. We can never be certain about them. But the generic ones about like when you have a plant grow, you know that there is absolutely no way that the fruit can grow before the stem. You know, there is absolutely no way for that to happen in nature. It's the same thing with us. There are certain stages which we all need to go through. The details are different. You know, the picture is totally different, but the overall structure underneath has to stay the same. Otherwise, it just doesn't work, doesn't make sense. So I think that it is a sign of youth to be rebellious against this concept, because I was too, and everybody in a different extent, because that's the natural way to be when you're there. But then when you get to another stage, it's another transformation that goes through, and then you can be totally creative within the limits of the generic cycle. That's why we have the science of astrology. That's why we follow the cycles of the planets, and we see that they demonstrate in history and in our life that we cannot avoid the how is it called, the consequence of things the way they are. Well, the details inside the structure are always different and creative and unique for the moment. I hope that makes sense. But are you reading Dane Rudier, by the way, or you have skipped him too?
How did anyone come up with this stuff? How did astrology come about? Somebody had to
Research it. Research that. There is an answer to that.
So tell me, what would I do? And I'm not discounting any opinions. I know I love different perspectives. This is another layer to it. Why would I go and read Plato? Or I will go and read Ptolemy? Okay. Maybe they have like some kind of foundation that I need. Or they open my mind to some kind of geometry that I wasn't aware of. Why would I go and read them instead of just observing what's happening every single day in my life and around everyone with me? Now,
because
I'm not
it's synthesis.
Hold on. I'm not saying this is the way to do it. I don't care what anyone does. It doesn't matter to me anymore because everyone just has their own opinions. I thought it would be fun to just share what happened to me as the progressed moon is transiting my Neptune, because that's my personal direct experience. And I make no claim that astrology works this way, but I thought what I'm going through is really illustrative of the Neptunian archetype.
It definitely is.
Period. So it doesn't
Definitely is.
matter if I'm in this illusion or I'm that illusion, or I'm going to change my mind in 10 years, or I'm going to be at a different point in my life. Who fucking cares? This is where I am. I'm telling you where I am, and I'm telling you about my experience of Neptune. Who cares what I'm doing in 5 years?
No, nobody cares. We're just philosophizing, analyzing, using your example. I mean, it really doesn't matter, but it matters as much as it can be a good example for anyone studying these things and seeing how they work in practice. So,
and I personally love when he asked me what was my experience on those days, and I could relate the story of seeing a miracle that is not logical, when the light, that's impossible for the light to come through a solid picture, except it happened. And that was my truth. And so I think we do need to open ourselves to, when people are not wanting any advice, anyone's information, but allowing them just to say, this is what is true for me. Nobody can disagree, or even, nobody, it's, no one. So I get both sides of this, but I just want to say what you shared, I love that personal sharing sometimes, rather than just knowledge that I could open a book and read. So that's just what I have to say about that. So thank you.
okay. So, guys, we are so much out of time again. Any other comments? Anything? Oh, yes, I forgot about the share.
No, I was going to say, I agree with that. I understand where you're coming from. I think when something is so deeply held in us, or it's in a place that is held really close to the heart, then it's in a almost of an untouchable type space. I see that with myself. I see that with other people. And for me, I feel like the cross point is that um, something that Neptune will do and something that Saturn will do. Maybe that's what Relina was referring to, is that at some point it forces everything that is held very close to us as a deeply individualized experience out into the open. And we begin to understand that that thing that we felt was so unique to us um, really isn't. But we cannot get there uh, until the appropriate time. And that's what Saturn does. It holds us, it locks us in, and we don't know until we know. And that thing that is so unique to us and is so uh, relevant and time specific, it isn't until after it has passed that we're able to say, you know what, it was not unique to me, and no, it was not time specific. It was something that was everlasting. But maybe it's naive on our point to even think that that it's possible to have someone understand um, hindsight in that way. And I also find it unique that, you know, that is also where your Pluto is falling, is right there at the first degree of Sagittarius, which is the degree of hindsight. It's the degree of hindsight, being able to look back in order to form a perspective, in order to form an opinion. Um, and I'm excited for you. I'm excited for you because I see the what's on the other side. I smile about it because as rapidly as the world is changing, the nature of just existence itself, there are things about it that are unchangeable that you don't realize until some time has passed.
Okay. Thank you, Robin. It's you have such a good voice, as we've spoken before, and you're so eloquent. So I really like listening to you. Wise, but at the same time calming. I don't know how you achieve
you.
this, but it's perfect for presenting something with your voice, I think.
Thank you, Radalina.
Mm.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you,
So
Emily.
thank you, Emo and Lauren and everyone else. And yes, we see how these conversations are very rich and very, I mean, we mixed, for example, today, I think in such a good way that we can see how the different energies in us are different and playing out and approaches and so on. And it's the to me the most important reason probably why we should study astrology, all in different kinds of ways, so we can share with more people that it is worth it understanding how we are different and the same. And this is the most Neptunian thing, isn't it? I think astrology is ultimately a Neptunian science, because even though it is leading maybe to breakthroughs and realizations as a Uranus thing, at the depth of it, it really is Neptunian, because through studying the symbols and how in my chart it's this, in your chart it's that, different things are being triggered, and then we obviously react in a different way. It helps us have real compassion and real understanding. Coming from knowledge, I don't just sympathize with the other guy, and because they're human like me, I sympathize in this sort of purely emotional way. I also know that they are on a different ground, and I remind myself that this is the case, and that helps at least someone like me. It really helps, because we are also very primitive in our emotions, aren't we? We're very quickly jumping when things are not going our way, or we're not feeling in the right energy field. But when we have the knowledge of these symbols, we really can relax and see that everything is actually all right. Do you agree? Say no. Yes. Okay, well.
What I'm going away with is I'm going to start really paying attention to the combination of Neptune and Mercury, and whether that makes a very confusing time, or if it's what's going on, that it's Neptune on Mercury and Mercury on Neptune, that and they're and that's what I'm gonna.
Okay, well, Lauren, allow me to. I mean, I'm kind of getting very emotional today. I don't know why. Maybe Moon in Scorpio is in the picture, but you see, you say I'm going to observe how the transits are working, and Emma was talking about observing transits. You see, one of the things that I try to somehow find a way to distance the two things from one another. When we are observing like this, we are presuming, aren't we, that these are forces that are going to cause something, that something outside is going to cause something. And we are standing up, observing what's going to happen, making a note, almost like a scientist, and seeing that was the effect, or this was the effect, and making certain conclusions. But isn't it that whatever Neptune does to your Mercury will be what your Mercury holds as a seed there in the chart in the first place, and what your whole history of Mercury throughout your life has come up to. So you've been working with your Mercury all your life in a particular way. Now Neptune is visiting it. And another person has Mercury in the same place as you, but they're going to be affected by Neptune in a different way. So your conclusions from your experiment, they may be great and very interesting, but will they be applicable to others? And is astrology really able to do that? And is it necessary to do that? Because why are we looking for statistics? Look at the chart.
That's the best part. Everyone is their own astrologer.
Exactly. But this is what's confusing us all. And that's why we often suffer from the imposter syndrome. Because we are very often deluded into the direction, make a science out of this. No, you can't make a science, as it's not a typical science. You need to mix the abstract with the concrete. If you do only abstract, you're getting half of the picture. If you do only concrete, you're getting half of the picture. And it simply becomes nonsensical at the end of the day. Yeah, it may be very interesting how something affects me, but it's interesting to me, for me. Maybe it doesn't apply to the other person because their chart and their history of the chart is completely different. So that's the mastery, how to read the symbol in context, in the moment, for this situation, for this person, at their age. And very few people can do that. None of us can. So
I think this is exactly why astrology, for me, of course, things are just the way they are, and I don't mind. It's not necessarily something to just be practiced as like your tool, but something to be learned as a language from the beginning, which is the language of time and the way the energy moves. And if everyone could just track the way that the planets move around in their chart, and they could study this and they could get lost in their own mystery and know it and see it and not need somebody else to hold their hand through it, I think that's amazing. This is the potential of astrology for me, is a language like English or like German, but it's a global language that we can all use because it's just symbols and pictures, which we can all connect to because we experience them in similar ways in our everyday life. The interconnectedness of Neptune.
They're subject to interpretation. So if you blur the interpretation too much, you fall into the risk of interpreting it how it's convenient for you. So there needs to be a balance again between the facts of astrology as a language, the syntax of that language, that we should find the best possible teachers, I think, to learn that from, not mediocre teachers, but teachers who really are thinkers, researchers, who really know what the essence of the symbols are, higher level teachers for that. And then when we come to the other realm of interpretation, then you rely on your voice, then you rely on your intuition and your at the moment interpretation. But if you don't have the basis of the reliable, like I don't believe that every book I read on Neptune I mean, this author knows what Neptune is all about. Only a couple of them out of, let's say, 30 really were up to something deep down. I mean, good thinkers, researchers, connection with other things, and so on and so forth. And I need to be selective in order to get there. If I don't select, how do I know? And then it becomes one whole mess in my head if I don't do that work. You see? So this is why I'm not saying just like rely on your experience. Your experience will limit you as well, as it's going to be very subjective. And you can't just play with the symbols without any boundaries, isn't it? Maybe we want to. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, everyone can do whatever they want. There is no, but I feel like if we need to be helpful to others, if you're giving consultations, you can't just, you know, but you're very intuitive. I mean, you particularly, Emma, you are so intuitive that you always get it right with or without information. So maybe you feel it and you say, well, why do I need the information then? But others, I think, need it more than you do. You know, other people will probably need it more. What would you say, guys?
Yeah, you stumped me there. I think that's true.
If I hadn't, for example, found certain things to read in the beginning and found others, I might have been totally discouraged to go into astrology and not take it seriously at all and just forget about it. And sometimes I think the other side of Neptune, the Virgo side, the sixth house side, which I kind of offer you now as a counterpoint, just for the sake of a Libra argument, you know, not for being against, but trying to find middle ground in a way, is that, you know, the other perspective is, let's discriminate. This one, okay, read this. No, that doesn't sound like this guy knows what he's talking about. Next one, next one, next one, until you find something that really has value. And then you don't need to be bound by it. You don't need to follow it by the book. You don't need to become a preacher of it or become a student of it or something like that. Just be selective about the quality of the things that come your way, as there is so much out there that we can easily get just drowned in the information. This is so Neptunian. We can easily say, well, this doesn't make any sense at all. Let's just drop it. But that would be a shame. That would be a pity, I think, because it's so much value in it, which deserves it, especially if you're so talented. If I was so talented as you are, naturally, maybe I would make miracles with combined with my sixth house, you see. But we are all like combinations of things that something is lacking, something else is not that good. But yeah, I kind
like
of
to
wish.
just
Yes,
say,
more.
like the aspect of time that you can say it's a week, it's 7 days, that's a fact. Like it's 28 days, that's a moon. But the experience, the individual experience of time is something different. And for me, sometimes what a person laying next to me says was 2 minutes, I've experienced a year of activity because of something going on. So time itself is very mutable to the individual. And that combination with facts is what's so important.
Mm-hmm. When you say time, do you mean the transits, how you experience the duration of
I'm
the
just
transit?
talking about time as a concept. It's not, you can say an hour has passed, but the
Mhm.
individual experience,
Of course,
I
yeah, of course, that's correct.
like, wow, because of an intensity, because of a texture, because of a density, then that same amount of time. And that's that factor that goes into fact finding and combinations, the mathematical part of it all.
Yes, and still this is just the tool, and what we're looking for is the meaning. And if we want to have the meaning, probably we can get to it in different ways, not just one. But it's such a difficult thing to kind of put right, isn't it? Because we don't quite know where the balance is. I don't know how much of one, how much of the other. Remember that book by Bernadette Brady where she says the ego and the lark, how we need to have the ego and the lark in the story. I don't know if you remember. So yes, we all have a bit of a like liking one side more than the other, depends on our own charts. But at the end of the day, maybe it's good to try to balance again every time we feel like we're going in one extreme.
When you said, like, my Mercury is my experience of my Mercury, and that you can learn the facts about what is Mercury to receive, what is the mind and everything. But then there's that individual experience factor of each one of us that's so important to take into account.
Okay, the question also is then, Lauren, how much we can analyze ourselves, you know, how much we very often need an external mirror in order. Maybe you don't have the right mirror, maybe I'm not the right mirror for you, but somebody else is. But the fact is we all need mirrors in order to see as an opposition what is really going on. Because yes, you have an experience, you can register it, write it down, I feel this way, but then what does this mean, and what does this mean for this moment and for the context of your whole life? Maybe this experience has a very broad meaning for you, very big meaning. Another one is trivial. It just goes and passes and it's not a big deal. So I guess by studying the cycles of the planets and the different transformations, we've been trying to do this with Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, next time Pluto. These four are really telling us that when they hit us, we need to pay attention to something which we may not be equipped entirely ourselves to understand. So that's why we need the help of the symbols. And we start digging through the symbols for clues, because at the end of the day, we are interested in the meaning so that we can follow our path in a consecutive way for us.
I think what I'm hearing between the two of you is the Pisces Virgo axis. And I hear Lauren with, you know, her Piscean experience. Pisces is timelessness, and everything regarding it is this space where time really isn't relevant, because as she says, you know, it's about what is the essence that is extracted from that particular moment, and it has nothing to do with anything in an objective concrete reality. And then what I hear you saying, Radalena, is, you know, that disappears into nothingness if you don't have a physical earthbound context to sink it into. It becomes pure abstraction and completely worthless, in the sense that it completely disappears if it's not able to be anchored in something.
Maybe, Robin, sorry to interrupt you, but maybe not always. I see, maybe, yes, I sound a bit like this, but maybe even that is acceptable, to be unanchored and not meaningful or whatever. Every now and then there are moments that require exactly that, maybe. But my main point is, why are we doing all of this in the first place? Are we not trying to do this process of individuation that Jung is talking about, and we're just using astrology as a tool? Because if that's not what we are up for, and if we're interested in other things, we're just curious, we're just enjoying it, or we're just, you know, there are could be so many different motives for getting into this. What I'm saying only is that if the motive is to develop yourself, to decipher what is the best way for you to apply your energies, the ones that you were born with, what are the right timings for different things for you to do, so that you are you know, effective and you're doing it according to your personal schedule, then you have to do it right. If you're not interested in this, you can just drift, and that would be all right as well. So you see where I'm coming from?
Yeah, and that is you know, Virgo, it's a tool. It's an understanding. It's something that's saying that it's not about just the whole or just the parts, but it's the parts and the whole together. I think that is a Virgoan or earthbound stance.
Well, no, this is the philosophy of holism, which combines the two. It says that no individual part can exist without being in the context of the whole and making up the whole, and no whole can exist without the parts. It's just the two things together. But the point is, you can start with the whole without going through the part first, as something needs to exist there in the first place, and the other way around. So they are constantly, that's why we are all conditioned in our lifetime, because culturally and everything, to think in black and white, yes and no, this or that. Well, this is the opposition that the energy is offering. Another philosophy of life altogether, the holistic philosophy, where everything is actually included. And this is as Neptunian as it could possibly be, if you think about it deeply, because you cannot have only one side, even if you are tending to want to go to only one side.
No, I agree with you.
In my explanation, just to clarify, it's not just the timelessness. It is that combination, and that we have to take the human experience in with the others, which is what we're all about.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah, I agree with both of you, which is kind of the point I was coming to, with seeing the both sides. My Mercury falls in Virgo, and it falls in the 12th house. And it is squaring Neptune, squaring my nodes. And so I very much, I understand where these two things meet with one another. I don't feel like they're at odds with one another, but they kind of, for me, at least in my mind, they represent two opposing sides of the same thing. And I think this is some of that work where when two things meet in the middle, trying to differentiate what that line is, or the space where things can be on opposing ends, but yet so completely tied with one another, it's difficult to say where one ends and the other begins, if that makes any sense.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and we can go on and on and on, and it's such an interesting conversation. One time we can make a topic like this. How we all understand, I think this is the most important topic, because why bother learning all those techniques and definitions and stuff if we don't know why we are all into this for? And I think that's the main question everybody's avoiding to answer for themselves, as it's so interesting, it's so tempting. Astrology is in trend like right now. People are curious, even if you're not very advanced, you can, to somebody out there on the street that doesn't know anything, they're now open. We live in Neptune in Pisces. Everyone is open for the transcendental, for the, for the spirit. Everyone wants to be spiritual nowadays. So offer them some astrology food and they would be happy to consume it, whatever it is, whatever the quality of it. But then, this is everyone speaking, of course, from their own perspective. I have got Mercury conjunct Pluto in Scorpio, so forgive me of this way of like being a bit extreme about, no, we have to be truthful if we want to be, really, how can I say, presenting the true picture of someone, true motive, not convoluted motive, Neptunian style, but have to not be scared to look at our own possible, like, motives. Like I found for myself that I wanted to appear smart at some point in the past. That was part of the motive. I had to clear that motive in order to start doing consulting work, until I felt that I don't want to appear in front of the client that I know a lot, at least a little bit, like, or at least be conscious about this. That's when I said, okay, now I can try and actually have a client. Otherwise, what happens is they come and it's not a consultation, it's a lecture. Yeah. I say, this is that. And they, oh, you're very smart. That's great. And what did they learn out of this? Absolutely nothing. They don't even remember it. So you see, this is just an example of how things
have you cleared your motive, or have you transferred it?
I don't think that I have totally overcome it yet, because with all this sixth house, this is part of me to be using more logic and information than real translation, which astrology requires. To learn how to translate the language without even saying one technical word is the hardest thing in the world. And the better you are, the more experienced you are, the more you can speak in normal language without even saying Pluto, Neptune, square, this or that or the other. And I found that I needed to do many consultations to get to that point. if I hadn't done them in the first place because I wasn't ready, I was never going to come to the point when there is a bit of an improvement to be seen. But there is so much more improvement to be seen, I mean, in the future. So it's very hard. It's very hard. So we can very easily get discouraged and doubt ourselves, especially in Neptunian times, whether it's worth it, whether we're doing it right, whether we're helping someone. And so I think the more honest we can be with what underneath us is also part of the motivation, that it's not purely altruistic, that it's not purely like, then the more we can, work on our own charts before we try to work on other people's things and so on. But anyway, I got very carried away today. I'm sorry, guys. It's just one of those days with lots of emotion. Okay, I stopped talking now. If you want to say something else, I think you all know what we're doing next, logically. Do you know what we're doing next? Pluto, yes. I promise I'll let you speak more about Pluto. Yes, Pluto, my favorite topic. Well, yes, I think with Pluto, like last time, remember how we accidentally transitioned to Neptune without planning to do that, but we were meant to be talking about Uranus. Now I think today we went into Pluto territory without even noticing it. So yeah. Okay, I'll see you in 2 weeks with Pluto.
See you then.
All right,
Feel free
guys.
to get in
Take
touch
care.
in the meantime if you need
Bye bye.
something. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everyone.
Marina.